Hello, everyone. Welcome. As you're coming in, please let us know what brought you here this evening. We're waiting for a few more people. I'll just start saying hello to some people. Hi, Al, who is an employee at the museum. Hello to Carol Wasserman, as well, was one of our donors. Hi, Emily, frequent viewer. And I think there are I see a few familiar names here, members, donors, and frequent viewers, or a combination of those.
We'll be taking questions at the end, right?
Yes, we will be taking questions. So please, you can type them into the Q&A at any time whenever you have them, whenever it strikes you. So you don't have to wait until the very end to put them in the Q&A, but we will be looking through them at the end. Looks like the numbers are starting to slow down, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I did get that, David, by the way.
Great.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. If this is your first time here, I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the Literary Program Coordinator at the Mark Twain House Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. Thank you for joining us for this virtual program for The Parrot and the Igloo, Climate and the Science of Denial. First, I want to thank our sponsors. Our virtual programs are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord, and we are happy to honor his memory with these programs. We are also incredibly grateful to the Wish Well Foundation and Connecticut Public WNPR for supporting all of our virtual programs. Please also consider supporting our museum by becoming a member. If you're not, I know there are a lot of members here, but if you're not, or if you know someone who you think would benefit from becoming a member, they receive all sorts of free stuff, free admission to our author programs, the house and museum, also discounts in the store and cafe, and much more. I'll put a link in the chat so you can share that with your friends. And now on to our guests. Our author, David Lipsky, is a contributing editor at Rolling Stone. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in The New Yorker, Harper's Magazine, The Best American Short Stories, The Best American Magazine Writing, The New York Times Book Review, and many other publications. He contributes as an essayist to NPR's All Things Considered and is the recipient of a Lambert Fellowship, a Media Award from GLAAD, and a National Magazine Award. Lipsky's the author of the novel The Art Fair, a collection of stories, $3,000, and the best-selling nonfiction book Absolutely American, which was a Time Magazine Best Book of the Year. And the Parrot and the Igloo actually was reviewed by the New York Times. And in that article, it says the novelist and journalist David Lipsky spins top-flight climate literature into cliffhanger entertainment. So check out that article in the New York Times, that review. Our moderator, Cynthia Von Bueller, is an award-winning American artist, playwright, and author of 5 books. Her latest graphic novel, The Girl Who Electrified Tesla, is woven around true crime facts such as Nazi interest in Nikola Tesla's death ray, Josephine Baker's spy activity during World War II, and Donald Trump's uncle's involvement in Tesla's mysterious death. I actually was reminded that listening to something, and so it is out there in the zeitgeist, that last fun fact about the Trump family. So as I said earlier, we encourage you to ask questions. Please put those into the Q&A section. Also please have conversation in the chat while David and Cynthia are having their conversation. This is, of course, a very important topic. So we really want to just talk about it and ask all the questions we have. Please also know that you can click on captions to see live auto captioning for this program. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, I'll be putting a link in the chat to purchase the Parrot and the Igloo through our museum store. Your purchase will support our museum and our honored guest. So that is all from me. I will turn this over to David and Cynthia. Please sit back and enjoy.
Omar, thank you so much. That was delightful. And let me assure our viewers that I'm experiencing terrible Zoom envy when I see where Cynthia is broadcasting from or webcasting from. I'm webcasting from Bopst Library at NYU, which has a very fluorescent look. It is one of the great places, though, in the world, Bopst Library. Cynthia, all yours. And again, Omar, thank you. It's lovely to be here.
I am in my new tower here, which is a library. So, yeah. So I have my first question.
Wait, hold on. Just before you go on, that's your library in your house?
Yes, I built a tower and I made it into a 3-story library.
Oh my
And
God.
it was my COVID project. So I have a lot of books, put all my books. Your book, this book is going to be on the shelf in here too. So, but my first question is you start your book with 3 men who started the power industry, electricity, in this country. And they are Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla. And they all have something in common, which is they all ended up giving away their inventions, or actually not giving them away, but losing rights to them, I believe. And Tesla actually, he's, I wrote about him as well. He ended up poverty stricken when he died. How did this happen? Like, how did these men who were so important end up like that?
I think that American business is one of the most skilled separators of people from money in human history. So I believe that's how that happened. I think even as skilled a capitalist as George Westinghouse can't beat the awfully impressive machinery of American capital. So Thomas Edison, if you guys own any products from General Electric, that company used to be called General Edison Electric. And then it was doing so well that JP Morgan decided we don't need Edison's name anymore. Westinghouse, who popularized Tesla's development of alternating current electricity, he had his company taken away because he wanted to give unemployment insurance and mortgages to his workers. And it's very hard to square that with a balance sheet. And Tesla seemed to be in it more. Tesla was a figure like Achilles. He was in it for heroism. He was in it to make his name and didn't seem to be in it. He liked sleeping in hotels. And so the main thing is when he had everything stripped from him, he even was written out of the history of electricity. But what he really wanted was he wanted to go to sleep and wake up in hotel rooms. And the subhead, one of the last subheads, yeah, and with his pigeon.
Was his wife's pigeon.
And one of the last subheads in his obituary in the Times was "not practical in business."
That's true. I think I have that problem as well.
All good-hearted people do.
My father actually worked at GE, so I'm very familiar with GE. So Tesla, you were mentioning that Tesla, he really wanted to give people free power at the end of his life. That was one of the things. He built this tower on Long Island. And his final, it was his final act, really. And JP Morgan invested in it. But when JP Morgan found out that he wanted to use it to give away free power, he pulled the plug on him, no pun intended. And so can we ever do things for the goodness of humanity and not for profit? Is it always going to be that technology is going to be used for profit?
So there's a scientist named Svante Arrhenius. Now, one of the interesting things to me about beginning the research on this story, and it is a story, it's a great story. It's the biggest story right now. It's a story we wake up to every morning when we walk out to our cars, when we walk out to the subway, in my case. And it's the story that we fall asleep to when we are deciding if we can risk turning off our air conditioners, right? But the basics of the story, one of the great surprises is that warming was first kind of discovered, the idea that carbon dioxide could drive warming, the idea that it held heat, how long ago do you think? I mean, you've read the book, Cynthia, so I can't
Yeah.
ask you the funny magician questions because you're a fellow magician now. But 1859, a scientist named John Tyndall figures out that carbon dioxide is one of the two gases really that keep heat trapped on Earth. And what he said is, if you stripped carbon dioxide from it's a blanket that is totally essential for our comfort. And if you stripped it from London for even one night, the country would be gripped in iron frost. In 1896, the Swedish scientist Svante Arrhenius sat down at Christmas. He was in a bad first marriage. He sat down at Christmas to begin doing calculations about what carbon dioxide does to our atmosphere. While he was sitting down, his wife packed up and left. And when he got up again, it was as if he had spent a year binging one single show on Netflix or on Amazon Prime. When he stood up, it was a year later, and he had worked out the basic ideas about carbon dioxide warming, what we call global warming. He was an optimist at that time in his life. And what he thought, remember, he's from Sweden. He thought, well, this will make Sweden warmer. It'll be great. It'll be wonderful for everyone's children. And by the end of his life, and this is a way of asking your question about whether we can trust business to do what's best for us, he said it's clear that at some point in the future, we're going to have to limit the influence of the profit-making industries in deciding what we do with our natural resources. I would go with Arrhenius on this.
I really love the title of your book, The Parrot and the Igloo. It's a captivating title. What does it mean to you?
So since we're talking about how long ago we in America knew about climate change, and 1956 is when a lot of American news magazines and newspapers began writing about it. Time magazine, which nobody would call an underground publication, they ran a story in May of 1956. Title was One Big Greenhouse. And it had the great dean of American climatologists, a man named Roger Revelle. And what he told readers of Time magazine was, in 50 years, this may have a violent effect on our climate. So 2006 is the time when he thought it would not just be apparent, but apparent in a very negative way. Another scientist, a man named Gilbert Plass, was talking to the New York Times. And the New York Times in October of that year summarized what his math said. And the math said that if it really became sort of runaway, that there would be warming at both poles such that they would be transformed. These icy landscapes would be transformed into tropical jungles with tigers roaming through the underbrush and gaudy parrots squawking from the trees. So we understood that in 1956. Now, amusingly, this, I guess, our sub-theme right now is American business. The science writer for the New York Times said, this is a strong warning, but it may not really have an effect on things because oil and coal are still cheap to burn and still profitable. And there's a good guess that they will continue to be burned as long as it continues to be profitable to do so. In 2010, one of the great denial senators, Senator James Mountain Inhofe, imagine if your middle name were Mountain, but Senator James Mountain Inhofe, he had been a really effective denier. He called global warming the largest hoax ever perpetrated on the American public. And there was a massive snowfall one February in DC, and his family built an igloo on the Washington Mall, and they plonked two signs on it. One said, Al Gore's new home. The second one said, honk if you love global warming, honk if you heart global warming. And the story tells the move from the parrot to the igloo in those 70 years. And it was a great big saga to tell. It was like The Godfather, but starring our weather.
Yeah, I mean, you did a massive amount of research. And I agree with the New York Times that you really did. I almost felt like at times the way you describe the characters, it's almost like reading a pulp novel or a crime novel or something, the way you talk about what they, they look like, and I don't know, it was interesting. But when I
By the
saw,
way, Cynthia, it is a
Yeah.
crime novel. I mean, it's a funny
it is a crime,
but
right?
we've
It
been
is.
living through this comic crime novel. Anyway, go on. It's like a Tarantino novel, or
It
it's a Coen
totally
Brothers
is.
novel.
It's
Yeah.
it is a crime novel. You're right. See?
Hmm.
So that's why you were writing. That's why you were writing it that way. It is a crime novel, definitely. When I saw the parrot and the igloo, obviously global warming, but the parrot, I was thinking of how birds, I love animals, and I was just thinking about how birds parrots repeat themselves. And we've known about global warming, as you said, for a really long time, and nothing's been done. Like, who were some of the parrots of the past? Like, who was there any people out there that just sort of was just saying, hey, everybody, wake up? I mean, I know Al Gore is one of them now, but was there anyone way back when that was warning us?
Gilbert Klass, the man I mentioned who spoke to the New York Times, Roger Revelle, very sourly in a follow-up with Time magazine, just said, look, we're changing the weather. Do you guys know that magazine Science?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's published by the AAAS, the American Academy for the Advancement of Science. And the incoming president in 1960 said, we have to start doing this now. I have an equation. We will plant, I think it was 1 new tree for every car, 5 trees for every truck, 10 trees per bus, and 25 trees per airplane. Otherwise, we just get hotter and hotter. So there were a number of people who were squawking in your figure, squawking the news.
Yeah.
But there's a great hero, like the second dean, and one of the great heroes in the book, and one of our great heroes, I think, is a climate scientist named James Hansen.
Mhm.
And by the 80s, so it was very well known what was going to happen with climate. And I'll go back in a second and talk about when the presidents basically began being told about it. But by the 80s, the temperature just began to climb in ways that people hadn't seen before. And scientists were noticing it. And they were beginning to say, look, we have seen the signature of global warming, right, of the greenhouse effect. We knew it was math. We didn't know if it was true. And so in their private conversations, they would say, this looks real. But scientists are extremely cautious, and no one wants to make a prediction or identify an effect if they're not 99.9% virtually certain.
That's true. That's valid. Yeah.
Yes. And so Professor Hansen asked to speak before Congress. And he asked that it be in the summer when people would understand what the heat was like on a day like today in Washington, D.C. I think it was June 23rd, 1989. And he said the thing that everybody had been avoiding saying, which is the greenhouse effect has been detected and it is changing the climate now.
And what year was that?
That was 1989. That was 2 days after the first day of summer, 1989. A huge day for people in the climate business.
I've been reading many articles about something called the how do I say this?
Anthropocene
epoch.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting, and it's how you can see what we've done to the environment by looking at the ice cores and the insides of trees. Was anybody looking at those kind of things, like looking at nature to try to see if we were doing anything? Is that why he was able to say that at that time?
Dr. Hansen used computer modeling, but he is a physicist. And so what he had seen, so do you guys, Cynthia, do you know what the Goldilocks problem is? The Goldilocks effect?
I've heard of it, but I can't remember what it is.
Okay, so one of the ways for a long time, one of the great proofs of the greenhouse effect. So what the greenhouse effect is, and by the way, again, the book I wrote is just a great story. It takes you from Edison to now, basically, because Edison and Tesla create the power industry, and the power industry helps create the incredible heat industry that apparently the planet and the leaves and the water is in. It created that business for everyone. Give me a second to reconfigure, because thinking about the terrible heat was a terrible shock to me for a moment.
Oh no, it's you mentioned you wanted it to read like a Netflix and like an episode or something, or like a series, and I could see that. It is like all of these different parts of our history and where we are now. I just think that's really, really fascinating. You mentioned the warming Arctic and you compare it to a Hemingway quote.
Yes, gradually and then suddenly. But Cynthia, can you go back to the question you were asking before? Because I thought it was
Sure.
fascinating and I wanted to
About the
actually,
Anthropocene.
yeah, so the Anthropocene. So people, the fascinating thing about this is how many times we were warned about it. So even by 1971, the head of the Johns Hopkins Department of Planetary Sciences said, look, we better start studying because by the turn of the century, the main driver for climate and for weather is going to be us. And that's what the Anthropocene means, basically. The thing that you were talking about, those are called proxies. You can tell old weather. There are a number of ways of telling old weather. They're like the fingerprints that climate makes as it moves through the years, or the footprints. So lake sediments are the footprints climate leaves, and tree rings are the fingerprints that it leaves inside. You can see basically by how well the trees were growing, you can see what the weather was like. There's a great scientist named Professor Michael Mann, and he made that his business, basically, to use those proxies and then to use the temperature record to demonstrate that temperatures were by about 2000 as warm as they had been for 600 years. And then a year later, he demonstrated that they were as warm as they'd been for 1,000 years. And the reward that he got for that was in one of the first great denial acts on the internet, he was attacked by literally everyone. And they began to pretend, they used him, they misused his research to pretend that all of global warming, all of the science had been a myth. And it is in that moment that Senator James Mountain Inhofe's family built their igloo at a time when essentially the deniers won. So yes, it's a really important part. That's why I was so happy you asked that question. It's a really important part of the story.
Yeah, it is. And actually today I listened to a podcast on Radiolab about it, about figuring out weather by looking at the tree rings, but also there were some scientists that got together and they were looking at how there were crashes in the ocean, like ships were crashing. Did you hear about that? It was really fascinating how they used the information about hurricanes that they got from looking at trees, and they correlated it to like ships sinking in the ocean. And I thought that was really interesting. So they wanted, like you were saying, scientists want proof, they want extra proof. And you can also look at the ice and things like that. But I thought it was really interesting that they were looking at
the proxy is thrilling. Yeah, it's fun. It's like CSI, but it's scientists.
Yeah, and I feel like there's so much you could do with that information. I mean, it's really important information for us going forward.
Absolutely.
So what was my question? Oh, okay, the warming Arctic. So you mentioned that you compare the warming Arctic to a Hemingway quote, and you have lots of literary mentions in this book, which I loved. And then Al Gore in his book, I think it's either in his book or his movie or both, he compared it to putting a frog in a boiling pot.
Yeah.
And so can you explain those metaphors and
sure. So it's a great thing.
And what was the quote?
So the quote is from The Sun Also Rises, and it's such a beautiful, beautiful quote. It's Lady Brett Ashley, her husband is being asked how they lost all their money, how they went bankrupt, and he answers two ways: gradually and then suddenly. And that essentially is how things. When one of the things that scientists are very anxious about is what's called feedback, and it's basically sort of self-reinforcing change. So it's a little bit like I'm going to violate body positivity for a second, and assuming that we all would like to be, in stronger shape as we get older. Let's say that you hurt your leg and you can't exercise. Let's say you've been walking 10,000 steps a day, right? Then you can't exercise and you're indoors and you're near your refrigerator. So you get a little heavier, and then you don't want to walk you only want to walk when your leg heals, you only want to walk 4,000 steps a day. So you're home and you're near the refrigerator more, right? And so it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. It's the same with warming at the poles.
Yeah.
If you think about the Arctic, it's all white. And if I see that you're wearing white today, I'm wearing a white shirt.
Mint green.
Okay, mint green, but mint green is a great thing to wear when there's a lot of sun. You must have worn a t-shirt when it's really hot, like in July and August.
Yeah.
Just for fun, someday just wear like a green polo, like a black polo shirt or a white polo shirt. Black will absorb heat, right? And white will reflect it. So
Yeah.
at our poles, they are covered in ice. It's seasonal ice at the North Pole, and it is continent spanning ice in Antarctica. And so when the sun comes down, it hits what is essentially a mirror, white, and it gets knocked back up. And so the heat doesn't accumulate.
Right.
That's one of the ways that we've stayed cool. However, as it begins to melt, it melts to water or it melts to soil. Those things then begin to generate more heat. And so then the melting starts going faster and faster. That's what began happening in the Arctic and the North Pole. And by 2007, the scientists there, one great scientist named Mark Twain, who had been on the fence about global warming from, let's say, the late 90s on, he said, the Arctic is screaming. So that's gradually and then suddenly.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Yes. But it's a brilliant quote. The second thing you were asking about was
The frog, the boiling frog
is great.
is a
So
similar-
I'd love it. I would love it if I could see the audience. Like, you guys have heard the boiling frog thing, right? It's tends to be used for relationships. It tends to be used for bad investments in your company. The idea is that if you put a frog in boiling water, jumps out immediately because it senses danger. That's how former Vice President Gore described it in his movie An Inconvenient Truth. Whereas if you put a frog in lukewarm water, it'll just sit there. And then if you slowly heat it, the frog will sit there and sit there and sit there until boiled frog. And that had been a wonderful management metaphor. And the business publication Fast Company decided to test the analogy. They engaged.
They heard them. Did they boil frogs?
Well, they said that first they called the American Museum of Natural History, and then they called Harvard. And the guy at Harvard said, that's, if I may say, BS. And then the guy at the Natural History Museum said, frogs will not sit still for you. If a frog had a means of jumping, they would jump. So if a frog is put in lukewarm water, it exits at 4.2 seconds. And if it's put in hot water, it exits at 1.5 seconds.
Right.
It turns out only human beings will stay in the same water. Like, human beings could be told in 1956, if we keep burning fossil fuels, which are great, which heat our homes and get us to work and get us from Connecticut to London in 6 or 7 hours. But if we keep doing it, our temperature is going to get slowly hotter. And we stayed in that pot for 7 decades.
Yeah. So frogs
we're
are
the
smarter than
frogs.
humans in
Exactly.
some ways.
No, in that one key way.
Yeah.
But I believe that we'll show them up soon.
Let's hope. Let's hope. So Al Gore. Al Gore is an interesting person. And do you think that we would be in a different place had he won the election?
Absolutely, a much better place. Cynthia, what do you think?
I think so too. I don't think we would be there because, as you know, with politics, you need to have both sides be on board to get things across. But I do think we'd be in a better position. Yeah.
I sometimes feel that, and I felt it this summer, but I felt on global warming, it's sort of like we're in one of those Marvel movies where you're shown an alternate future where Spider-Man has died and Iron Man never invented the suit. It's like we're being shown what life would be like if we didn't control climate change, if we didn't stop releasing as much carbon dioxide. So I sometimes feel that we're being used as a cautionary tale for people who can then repeat this period with things like Vice President Gore becoming president.
Right. Or maybe he won in a different dimension. And
yes,
we're
exactly.
this crazy
yeah, and then when they need fun, they just open the window and they look at us like, oh wow, it is really hot and unpleasant there.
Totally. Did you vote for him? Did you vote for Gore?
Yes, and I went to DC to picket President Bush's inaugural. I was surprised there weren't more people there. I've never confessed this.
I mean, I voted for him too. I
Yeah.
didn't absolutely love him or anything, but I did like that about him. I liked that he was really into climate, was really important. And actually wasn't one of his teachers was Revell. Is that how you say his name? Revell was
it was it was Roger Revell was at Harvard. Just like incredible luck. That's why it seems like we're in some alternate timeline. So the first gentleman who warned in 1956 that in 50 years this could have a violent effect. He was teaching at Harvard when Al Gore was there, and he made a huge impression on him.
Yeah.
Everything was designed for us to solve this.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So one of the things you mentioned it a little while ago, you mentioned that the people who would set up the meetings on climate, that they would put them on, they would make them on the hottest day of the year,
Yeah.
like to make a point.
Yes.
And you know, I used to I have to go to California a lot, and the smog. I don't know if you've been there in the time when there was a ton of smog. The smog was terrible, and it's not as bad now. And the people finally voted for somebody who did something about the smog, and they, you know, they didn't fix it, but it is a lot better. And so my question is, do we need to experience disasters, you know, like we just had floods here? Do we need to experience these climate disasters in order to want to do something about it? Is that what the humans are like?
Well, that's what happened with ozone. It's even what happened with smog. Like, by the way, smog was such a recent development. It wasn't with LA immediately. LA was referred to by Mark Twain's old writing partner, Charles Dudley Warner, whom I think he wrote The Gilded Age. He wrote a book about the Southland called Our Italy, because it was so mellow and beautiful. And when Fitzgerald wrote a short story in 1928 about the film industry, he said that someone got in their car and drove into the everlasting hazeless sunlight of Los Angeles, which you could never, yeah. But when we industrialized to fight the Germans in 1941, LA was suddenly in the defense contracting business. It went from, I think, 1,500 factories to over 8,000. And suddenly there was smog. I think the date, I think it was July 8th, 1943 is the first time that we saw it. One of the amusing things about it for the history of climate is that the smoke was so extreme that it was keeping us from the sun. And so it was hiding the greenhouse effect for about 40 years. And as we passed clean air legislation, as President Nixon, as you and I were discussing before, as he passed clean up the air legislation, when the air got better, global warming resumed. So one mark of how good our anti-pollution efforts have been, because LA had just become too ugly to live in, they had to clean the air up, is that it made the planet begin to heat. The pollution was so extreme that it was referred to as global dimming.
Yeah, yeah, it was bad. You mentioned Nixon, and Nixon, like, I was really surprised that he started the Environmental Protection Agency. Did he really care about the environment? He seemed like a money guy, you know, like he really cared about money, but did he care?
No, what he said is, but it was so, the country in places like, and Wendy, that's a great question. Wendy was asking if there's anything we can do. People like Vice, yeah, oh, got it, okay. God, Wendy's question made me forget your question. Can you remind me?
Oh, my question is about Nixon. Like, do you think?
No, so Nixon was amazing. He passed more environmental legislation than anybody. The journal Environmental History said one of the great ironies is that President Nixon has been our most effective president for the environment. No, he just said, keep me out of trouble on environmental issues. And at the same day or the same year that the New York Times was calling the new anti-pollution laws one of the few bright spots in a dismal year, he was telling two Ford Motor execs that the environmentalists want to go back in time and live like a bunch of damn dirty animals. What they're interested in is destroying the system. But Americans wanted a cleaner environment. So that's a sort of a good answer to Wendy's question. When the American people want a change, like think how quickly, think how far ahead of the politics we were on gay marriage, right? On non-heteronormative marriage. President Obama, wonderful president, he was not there yet. He thought that we would have civil unions, but we said, no, we want this now. So similarly, President Nixon would never have signed in the Environmental Protection Agency, except the American people basically demanded it as the price of his job. So that's what we can do. What Vice President Gore said, because at the time, around the time of his movie, there were all these movements saying you can do it with your shopping habits. or you can do it with your electricity habits. You can do it with light bulbs. And what he said is, no, we have to change our laws, not our light bulbs. And a very strong columnist, Tom Friedman from the New York Times, he was at the same event. He said, what I always say is, it's about changing our leaders, not our light bulbs. So there is
Yeah.
something we can do every 2 to 4 years.
Yeah. That's what I got out of your book, actually. I thought that was an interesting quote, and I think it's true. I think that it's good to do all those things. I don't eat meat, and I plant clover in my yard because it's better for the than grass. But I think that that's true. I think that politics are the way to go, changing laws. But it just seems though that with politicians, they have these short-term goals, and their short-term goals are, get voted in. I think one of the other things that we could do, this is my opinion, I'd like to hear yours. I think that there should be a ban on lobbyists. And I think that there should be definite, like the funding, the political funding that should have much higher limits. And in the past they did, and then they raised them, they raised them. But I think that would help. What do you think? Do you think that those things are worthwhile? Or
yeah, although I think so. You were asking, does it take a disaster? I think a summer like this one, which has removed and burned away a huge amount of doubt, I think that in its weird, awful way, I think every drop of sweat that we're all shedding, I think that helps. But politicians are politicians. There was, for me, a tremendous quote. So we were talking before about when the American president started to know. By 1979, the National Academy of Sciences had referred to President Carter saying this is going to happen. There's a secret organization, not secret anymore, called the Jasons, who are the best scientists in America, and they report to the Defense Department and other parts of our defense establishment. And they wrote a paper in the spring of 1979 saying, this is coming, it's happening. And it unnerved the White House. And so they went to the National Academy of Sciences and they said, can you evaluate all these reports that are coming in? Is our planet going to begin to warm because of the carbon dioxide we're putting in the atmosphere from cars and from power plants? And they retired to study the studies. They retired to the Cape Cod Study Center of the National Academy of Sciences, which I imagine is a very nice place to research. And they came back, they were like the jury that returns a quick verdict. They said that the results would be reassuring to scientists, but disturbing to policymakers. If carbon dioxide continued to increase, they saw no reason to believe that it wouldn't cause climate change, and no reason to believe those changes would be negligible. What the Academy had said in their report in 1975 was that we had to begin changing our energy sources then, or for all practical purposes, the die would already have been cast. And when those scientists went to brief lawmakers in person, the lawmakers said in 1979, they said, when will these effects start to really be felt? And the scientists said, give or take 40 years. So around 2019, right? And the politicians said, well, get back to us in 39.
Right.
So yeah, so that's kind of, again, it was thrilling and terrifying and funny to write about, but that's why we're here. We were given as ample a warning as you could possibly be given.
I read about junk science. I think I maybe read about it in the past, but you reminded me of junk science and sound science. And it reminded me of like fake news and Trump, like Truth Social. Yeah. And like, can you explain what junk science is? And,
sure.
and did you come up with that correlation too, or did you see that as well?
No, it's I thought it was great when I saw it. So let me warn our viewers that I may seem somewhat fluid on this, but Cynthia had asked me that question in advance, so I had a good amount of time to think about it. You may have noticed that some friends of yours or some family members don't really believe in climate change. And there are reasons for that, and they're interesting, and the book kind of talks about them. I'm sure we've all run into people in our offices or in our families or at family holidays who specialize in kind of taking what are clear facts and trying to change your memory of them, and then trying to change your opinion about them or about situations based on kind of fiddling with your memory. The oil companies and the coal companies hired the best people at that they could find. And the Republican Party hired the absolute best person at that they could secure to begin changing the way we think about this issue. So we were talking about the hearing that was held on the hottest day of the year in Washington, D.C. in June 23rd, 1989. About 3 years later, the coal industry had a sort of meeting. And because it was very clear that most scientists in America, most climate scientists believed the signature of the greenhouse effect had been cited, and they felt that our planet was heating up, our country was heating up. And so they had a planning document that what they had to do was to reposition climate change, reposition global warming rather, as theory rather than fact. And they went out and they hired 3 or 4 scientists who could then begin to tell the story their way. In 2002, you guys may have noticed, and sometimes before we get to junk science and sound science, which was also beautiful work on the people working on behalf of tobacco, oddly enough. But sometimes people will say, you know, how come it was once called global warming and now it's called climate change? That shows it's not happening. There's a reason for that change. In 2002, a brilliant pollster for the Republican Party, a man named Frank Luntz, he was hired by the Republicans and by the Bush White House, the White House that we had instead of former Vice President Gore's. And they were trying to figure out a way to deal with the political fallout of global warming. And so what he said is, I advise you to stop using the word global warming. We need to stop using the word global warming and start using the phrase climate change, because global warming has catastrophic associations. And it means that we have to do something about it. Whereas climate change sounds just like you've gone on vacation from Ohio to Fort Lauderdale. And
it's funny that you say that, because I think, I don't know, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, I was on social media and I used the phrase climate change and everybody attacked me. It's not climate change. It's global warming. It's climate crisis. And I was like, yes, okay, right. I made a mistake.
But you see how beautiful it is? Because that will start arguments as opposed to people saying, what do we do about this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then with junk science and sound science, the people who were funded to go out and say this wasn't going to happen, and they would also say, once it was clear that it was starting to happen, they would say, you know, it's going to be good. It will lead plants to grow longer growing seasons and they'll grow taller, right? And it will mean that it won't be as hot in the summers and it'll be warmer in the winters. A lot of that was funded by the tobacco industry in the 90s. And the reason why was hysterical. And awful and thrilling to write about, and makes for a great story. What they felt was that the EPA was saying that secondhand smoke was bad, that it was one of the leading carcinogens in the country. And so they made a determination that we all make when we're trying to convince people not to listen to someone. If you could show that the EPA was wrong about something important, then maybe they were wrong about cigarettes. So they began funding people to say, they're wrong about global warming. And thus, since it's the EPA and they're crazy on this issue of the climate changing, maybe they're wrong about whether you can smoke in a movie theater or smoke on an airplane or smoke in a restaurant. And so they invented these two terms. What they said in meetings was, they were very upfront. We need a better term than bad science. It's too inexact and it's not sticky. And so they found a writer who had invented this term junk science. And what they found was, if you called something junk science, people just wouldn't trust it because they already had this association with junk food as food you shouldn't eat. And then they invented another phrase, which is sound science. And the simple thing that the head of the American Academy for the American Academy for the Advancement of Science said is that it has no meaning. Junk science is what I don't like, and sound science is science that helps my industry. And the idea that people will use those phrases is the tremendous effect of professional mood determiners, professional opinion
it's like
changers.
they do that in advertising all the time. Yeah. If a product, you know, they'll say lipstick doesn't smudge off. And if I see that, I think, it definitely will. The opposite, right?
Yes,
but
that's
I
junk
think
advertising.
Well, it's interesting that, you know, with fake news and Truth Social, I just think there's a correlation there.
Absolutely.
That was like, I just thought, oh, wow, this isn't the first time that we've had these kind of terms. Because that was in the 80s. So okay, I have some wine here and I'm The next question, I need to take a sip of wine for the next one because it's kind of somber. And so hold on, I'm gonna have a sip of wine. Okay, so I'm wondering, what is going to be the end of humanity? Is it going to be global warming? Is it going to be nuclear war? Or is it going to be AI? Or none of the above? What do you think? I'd like to see what the audience thinks too.
I'm curious. I'm curious as well. But the AI, of course, would use both to finish off humanity. So the AI would encourage us to keep using the same fuels, right? And then one of the interesting things that the CIA began to notice when they did their early reports on this in the first half of the 70s is that as things get warmer, you have more conflict. So that climate change would be a way to bring on nuclear war. So, but truthfully, I think we're a pretty hardy species. Like one of the nice things about writing a book that tells us the whole story of warming from Edison and Tesla to now is that we're pretty resourceful. And I think that we'll find a way out of this. I think it was just, there was so much time. There were those 40 years, those 50 years wasted, but I think that time isn't being wasted anymore. And so I feel that AI may be a threat for us, but human intelligence, I think human intelligence is turning its powerful searchlight on this problem now.
I mean, we could also, I was talking to my husband about it. We could also merge with AI in a way, like put AI into our brains and somehow, use it.
Oh, yeah. Well, if we're talking about a superhero solution, yes, we could. Absolutely. We could merge with a computer and then we could float above it and we could burn the excess carbon dioxide.
Well, isn't that what Elon Musk is doing with his Neuralink? I mean, it's not necessarily sci-fi. He's kind of,
but in a way, Elon Musk, he has made electric cars a luxury item. So yes, Elon Musk may be a solution to this already.
Okay. All right. So after that question, I'd like to end on a more positive note. And I think we had someone who asked like what we could do. It seems like voting is important. Obviously, I personally think like, don't eat as much meat because factory farming is really bad, and get an electric car. I want to get the electric flying car. I don't know if you saw that one.
I did see that one.
Like,
I've been waiting since the Jetsons.
Me too. But so what do you think? What can we do?
Well, do you remember, Cynthia, do you remember the Keep America Beautiful ads? You're probably too young to have seen those. Yeah.
I read that in your book too. Yeah.
So
with the crying Indian.
Yeah, there was an Indian there's a First Peoples Native American he's paddling a canoe and then he walks into that sort of that heartless sort of soul killing site of a super highway, right? Like on a gray day, and people are throwing trash, and a car goes by and it throws like fast food trash on his moccasins, and the camera goes in tight and he lets one tear. It's referred to, by the way, as the most famous tear in media history. I think it's been seen something like 5 billion times.
Wow.
And so that became this incredibly successful ad, and it motivated generations of American kids to police litter. And so when they would see their grandparents or their parents dropping candy wrappers or throwing things out the car window.
Remember when, like in Mad Men, when they're throwing garbage out the windows?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And because what the slogan of that ad was, the way it read was, people start pollution, people can stop it. And the idea was there's stuff you can do like not eating meat, etc. It actually turned out that the Indian, of course, was a Sicilian American. He was a fake Indian.
That devastated me.
Yeah.
And
the organization, so no, Cynthia, it was killing, right? Like to have that bit of that faith.
That would never happen nowadays. Are you kidding me? Like,
it must happen a little bit because there is, in the Native American community, there is a phrase for it, a pretendian. So he was a pretendian.
Really?
But the organization was fake. The organization Keep America Beautiful.
What was the
it was the bottle and can industries. It was the people who made the cans for Pepsi and Coke and made the bottles for Coors and for Miller Lite, and they didn't want to have recycling. So what they were saying, think of the slogan that way from their boardroom. People start pollution, people can stop it. That means not industry and not from voting. So when you think about what you can do, as opposed to focusing on what politicians can do, you're often acting out what industry would like. Like I would go with Vice President Gore, just focus on changing leaders and changing laws. Because often when people are telling you what you can do, and we know it from our friends, what they're really saying is what they're unwilling to do.
True. So I have a question.
Sure.
Do you think Smokey the Bear is not real too?
No, Smokey, that was the real deal. That was
Okay,
that was
right.
that was an honest campaign.
All right, that's good. That's good to know.
But that's why in Smokey and the Bandit and in CB Chatter, that is why police are called Smokies, because their hats look like the hat being worn by Smokey the Bear.
Oh, that's
So,
cool. I didn't know
thank you
that.
for the question.
Yeah, I think that those are my questions. Maybe we can go. If there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, there is one thing that, like, one of the funny things about the story is that we keep seeing the reasons that we need to change, right? And then we don't do it. And it reminded me of this great story about relationships, which is that a strong person, they will just leave without telling you the reason. They know the relationship is bad, so they will walk out on the relationship without telling you the reasons. And a weak person tells you all the reasons they have for leaving and then stays. And I think with climate, we keep saying all the reasons why we have to change. And it's almost like that stands in for taking action. And I think now, as of this summer, I think we can be that wise person who just says, look, we're going to act now. And to me, one of the really interesting things about COVID, I know people have a lot of bad feelings or mixed feelings about the schools being closed and about staying home. But what it really showed me as I was finishing up this great, funny story is that we can take sudden and dramatic action if we have to. And I think that if we're the equal to that, we're certainly the equal to this.
I love that. That's a really good point. That's a great point.
Thank you, Cynthia.
So let's go back to Omar. Before we do, I just want to say this is his book. There's a great review in the New York Times. When did it come out? Like
the book came out on Tuesday, so a week ago today.
Okay, and just so, and this is my book on Tesla.
That's great.
It's a graphic novel. It's all illustrated. It's very different than his book, but I also do a lot of research. So Omar, back to you.
And thank you again,
Cynthia. So I'm going through we have a couple of questions. Someone, I forgot to get their name. Linda asked, big oil has been spreading misinformation about climate change for years.
Yes.
Why don't we look to them to pay for some of the things that would make a difference?
I think that's probably, I think that's probably terrifying to them. That is what happened with the tobacco companies. There was a decision reached, I think it was 2007, which put them on the hook for the 50 years of disinformation that they had engaged in. And I think that may prove to be a model. It's an excellent question. And I believe that may be where we'll end up.
We have another question from
Line after this.
Davida. My instinct is that we need to marshal all resources to put pressure on the financial institutions that are lending, funding, and ensuring fossil fuel projects. What do you think about that as a strategy vis-a-vis corporations and government?
I think that's brilliant. Professor Hansen, Jim Hansen, the fellow who had the bravery, and he did it for his children, right? He just thought he didn't want his children to be able to say to him, our father knew what was going to happen, and he didn't make it clear. He also believes in legal solutions. So he's been helping a bunch of students sue basically the government, right? For giving away their future. So I think that is a great solution.
And we have one last question, unless someone else has another question. This is from Dawn. I read that John Muir said, "Nothing tolerable is safe" over 100 years ago. He was referring to the climate then. Isn't the dollar the final downfall of the climate in the end?
John, it's a beautiful quote. That is what Arrhenius, who is the father of carbon dioxide warming as a science, that is essentially what he said. He said we had to eventually forbid the profit-making industries from determining how we would use our natural resources. So he would agree with me. Or I do think that we will find a way out of this. I think that we are very resilient. 150 years ago, we didn't have an electric power industry, or we just had a very nascent one. And now here we are, right? We have electric cars. We are communicating. One of the things Tesla always wanted was a device that would allow you to speak with someone in any part of the world from any part of the world. And now we have these incredibly powerful things in our pockets, right? And everyone incorporated them into their lives within about a 15-year period. I think we can marshal the political will to change things. And I think that once American industry is directed at a problem and they see that there is profit to be made there, I think that incredible ingenuity can help us solve things. So I am optimistic, and I'm optimistic because we were finally shown, as all those scientists were warning, that we're going to start feeling the effects in 39 years. We're feeling them. And as Americans, when we feel an effect, we often tend to do something. I just think that sometimes we're the frog in the beaker. And unlike the frogs that jump out, we have to notice that the water has gotten algae filled and a little bit warmer than to our normal taste.
You need to be smarter than frogs.
I think we're about to prove it.
And that is all the questions that there are from the
Great
viewer.
questions.
Yeah, great questions. Do we have anything else to close out on? Any last questions, comments from either of you?
I would like to add one more thing from my inexhaustible fund of quotes from people who were brilliant on the climate. I mentioned that guy, John Tyndall, who is the scientist in the 1850s who worked out that it was carbon dioxide. He said a great thing. He said, "It is as cowardly as it is foolhardy to blink facts when they are not to our taste." And I think we're done with that too. So
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. This
David?
has been amazing.
you
It's
guys were
wonderful
great.
talking
Thank
to you. This is a really
Yeah.
important topic.
It
Yeah,
was wonderful talking with both of you. Thank you so much. Those were great questions, Cynthia, and you were a wonderful host, Omar.
yeah. Thank you, Cynthia. This has been a great conversation, and I'm sure we'll continue having it. I mean, we have to. There's no other choice. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. Please join us again for other author programs, and also please join us at the museum for a tour. We're open every day. Check our website for more information on our hours. David, if you ever want to visit us, please drop me a line and I'll make sure you get a tour.
Omar, revisit. I've been to the house. It's a beautiful, beautiful site. So of course it'll be fun to visit again. But thank you, Omar. I'll take you up on that.
Excellent. All right. Well, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Bye.
See you.
Thank you.